to avoid any echoing or feedback sounds during the call. Public comment will be limited to 1 minute. And at this time, we'll
Recording in progress.
Okay, now we know we're being recorded. It is all live. Thank you for bearing with us as we work through the technical challenges of returning back to a live hybrid version. So at this time, we'll ask Commissioner Taylor to lead us in the flag salute.
All right. Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Taylor. State Board of Education members Cynthia Glover-Woods and Sharon Olkin are joining us as the charter liaisons for this meeting. And also one thing I'd love to mention is that in addition to being a State Board of Education member, Sharon Olkin is also the Executive Director of Gateway Public Schools in San Francisco. So welcome and thank you to both of you for joining us today. At this time, I'm going to call on the commissioners to state their names and who they represent on the commission. And we'll begin to my left with Commissioner King.
Dr. Derek King, Charter Schools.
And Commissioner Austin.
Jared Austin, representing parents and guardians.
Commissioner Garbelina Majica. Commissioner Taylor.
I'm Matt Taylor, representing charter schools.
Commissioner Farland.
Stephanie Farland, representing the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman.
Commissioner Sever.
This is Wes Sever, representing superintendents in California.
And we'll do our best to keep track of you, Commissioner Sever. And I am Commissioner Mike Walsh, and I represent governing boards of school districts. So at this time, I will entertain a motion to adopt our meeting notes from the February 2022 the Advisory Commission Charter School meeting. So I have a motion from Commissioner King. Is there a second? Second.
This is Commissioner Sever, I'll second.
We'll do that as well. So we have Commissioner King made the motion, and Commissioner Sever will see him as the second. We'll take a vote. So Commissioner King, how do you vote? Aye. And Commissioner Garbelina Majica? Aye. Commissioner Austin?
Aye.
And Commissioner Taylor?
I'll abstain. I was absent that meeting.
Commissioner Farland?
Aye.
And I will vote as an aye. And Commissioner Sever, you were absent, so are you planning to abstain?
Yes.
Thank you. Members of the public who wish to make general public comment for items that are not part of the ACCS agenda, you may dial in now. Please call 717-908-1926 and use access code 1166083#. Please note that the access code must be entered in order to be joined to the caller queue. Again, this isn't time for those of you who wish to make a public comment for something that is not part of the agenda. For those intending to make public comment in person, please be sure to use the sign-up sheet in the back of the room. Now, at this time, there will be no charter schools division update for this meeting, so we will continue. The Advisory Commission on Charter Schools will hear 2 items today. So at this moment, we're going to open up the comments for general public comment that are not on the agenda. Speakers will have up to 1 minute to make their comment. And again, as I said, we will start taking public comment now. We will start with any public comment from those who are attending in person. And so I know we do have someone here, but we're not sure if that's for general public comment. Okay. And at this time, looks like we have no one for general public comment. So at this time, we will go ahead and move on to anyone calling in. So for people calling in to make general public comment, please note that upon dialing in, you will be added to a caller queue. The operator will notify you when it is your turn to provide public comment. And again, you will be limited to 1 minute. So at this time, do we have anyone wishing to present, to make public comment?
No, not at this time.
All right. Then we will move along. Item number 1, consideration of request for determination of funding. And so people wishing to make comment on item 1 should call in at this time. Please call 717-908-1926 and use access code 1166083#. Please again note that the access code must be entered in order to be joined to the caller queue. And then for those intending to make public comment in person, once again, please use the sign-up sheet in the back of the room. So at this time, we'll turn this over to CDE staff to go ahead and make the presentation.
Good morning, Chair Walsh and members of the Commission. My name is McKenna Huey, representing the Charter Schools Division, and I'll be presenting both items on today's meeting agenda. Can you guys, hello? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay.
You'll have to pull it really close.
Okay, got it. Can you guys see the PowerPoint on the screen? Okay. VSS, can we switch the video to show the PowerPoint on the screen that the commissioners see?
Again, to the public, thank you for bearing with us as we work on a few technical challenges.
Got it now, McKenna. You can see it.
All right. So item 1 consists of requests for determination of funding for non-classroom-based instruction from 5 charter schools: Coastal Grove Charter, New Village Girls Academy, Adeo Valley Charter, Spring Lake Charter, and REACH. Pursuant to California Education Code Section 47612.5D1, a charter school that has an approved charter may receive funding for its non-classroom-based instruction only if a determination of funding is made by the State Board of Education. The California Department of Education reviews a charter school's determination of funding request and presents it for consideration by the ACCS pursuant to relevant sections of California Code of Regulations Title V. However, for fiscal year 21-22, certain schools are exempt from the requirement to obtain an approved funding determination from the State Board pursuant to Senate Bill 820, Section 75. Specifically, this bill extended the deadline for charter schools to submit a funding determination request from February 1 to June 30th of the fiscal year in which their current funding determination is scheduled to expire. Additionally, this bill permitted charter schools that submit a request by June 30th to maintain their current level of funding for non-classroom-based instruction for 2 years. So the California Department of Education presents this item to the ACCS today as 4 of the 5 schools do not have an active funding determination that expires on June 30th. As such, Senate Bill 820 is not applicable, and these schools are each required to obtain an approved funding determination from the State Board to receive funding for their non-classroom-based instruction. So Adeo Valley Charter, one of the 5 schools presented in this item, does have an active funding determination that expires on June 30th, 2022. However, the department presents this school's request to the ACCS today as the school underwent a material change to its charter. Adeo Valley Charter was previously a resource center for Adeo Charter. However, it separated from the school to comply with the geographic location requirements established by Assembly Bills 1505 and 1507. So pursuant to this statute, upon its separation, it was required to be treated as continuing for all purposes, including funding. It thus continued to be funded based upon Adeo Charter's approved funding determination through fiscal year 21-22 without having to go through the funding determination process itself. So in order to continue to receive funding for 2022-23 and beyond, the CDE requested that Adeo Valley Charter submit a funding determination request pursuant to California Code of Regulations, Title V, Section 11963.6D, which states that a determination of funding shall be subject to review each time a material change is made to the school's charter with respect to non-classroom-based instruction. So all schools presented in this item meet the expenditure and pupil-to-teacher ratio requirements for a recommendation of 100% funding for their non-classroom-based instruction. As outlined in this table, all schools reported spending at least 40% of their public revenues on certificated staff salaries and benefits, spending at least 80% of all revenues on instruction and related services, and maintaining a pupil-to-teacher ratio that does not exceed 25:1. For this reason, the California Department of Education proposes to recommend that the State Board approve the determination of funding requests at 100% for 2 years for all 5 charter schools. Although some of the schools have requested this funding for additional years, it is the department's current practice to recommend time periods based on the number of years a charter school has been in operation and the number of times it has gone through the funding determination process. Because these schools have not previously gone through this process, the department is recommending funding periods of 2 years for all schools. Thank you for your consideration of this item, and I'm happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
So at this time, do any of the commissioners have clarifying questions for staff? And again, once again, reminder, the clarifying questions are just simply meant to address any uncertainty regarding the information presented by staff. Also, I'd like to make a request if we could get Commissioner Sever also on the screen. It'll make it easier for me to find out when he has a question. Is that a possibility?
I have a question. I will talk really loud.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Sever. That'll help.
Not a problem.
So again, all substantive questions that go beyond addressing, there you are. So any questions that go beyond addressing any uncertainty about the information, that should be held until after public comment. So at this time, do any of the commissioners have clarifying questions regarding the CDE presentation? So Commissioner Austin, go right ahead.
Did I hear you correctly that you said because they have not done a funding determination in the past, that the practice from CDE is to only recommend a 2-year when they qualify for a 5-year?
That is correct.
And that's always been the case?
It's been our practice for the last few years. We base the number of years that we recommend, again, based on how long they've been in operation and how many times they've been through this process. So if they haven't been through this process before, we recommend 2 years.
Okay, I just didn't remember that practice. Thank you.
Commissioner Taylor.
Have any of these schools been through the process before?
No, they have not, which is why we're recommending periods of 2 years.
Got it.
Commissioner Sever, did you have anything?
Nothing at this time.
Thank you. Any other commissioners with questions? All right. Is there any public comment for item number 1? All right. And then do we have anyone who's calling in for public comment? Let me read this one more time to give them an opportunity, and then you let me know. For people calling in to make public comment, please note that upon calling in, you will be added to a caller queue. The operator will notify you when it is your turn to provide public comment. And again, public comment is limited to 1 minute per speaker. So do we have anyone calling in?
We currently do not have any callers in the queue.
All right. So at this time, we will go ahead and move on to our deliberation, at which point I'll go ahead and entertain any questions that the commissioners have. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Ask a question.
Please. I'm sorry.
Just because I am an operator that has to do these too, it's a lot of work to do these. And when you meet the criteria for 5 years and you're told you could only do 2, that's pretty defeating, and it's a lot of work to have to redo. And as we know, we've sat in these chairs for a while, that these may change in regulations and there's thoughts. So having the security of knowing 5 years when you qualify for 5 years does seem fair. So my ask is that the department would reconsider that practice, because I don't remember that being on when I first joined the commission, and maybe others do. But I do know, as someone who has to do these funding determinations, it's a lot of work. And when you do meet the criteria, I think he should be allowed to meet what the statute says of getting the full 5 years. So, I don't know if that's a question or a consideration.
Thank you. So at this time, I will entertain a motion. Do I hear one? So Commissioner Garbarino-Mojica moves recommendation forward, and is there a second?
Yes, Commissioner Taylor, I'll second.
So we have a second. At this time, I'll go ahead and take a roll call vote. And again, the motion is to move forward the recommendation from CDE. I'll begin with myself, and I'll vote aye. Commissioner Taylor?
Aye.
Commissioner Sever?
Yes.
Commissioner Garbarino-Mojica? Commissioner King?
Aye.
Commissioner Farland?
Aye.
And Commissioner Austin?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Just as a reminder, because some of your voices aren't picking up, so if you've got the red light on, that means you're open to talk. So red light off means we can't hear you.
How about this one?
Yeah, that actually is picking you up.
Oh, when it's red, it's on?
Yes. I think in this case, it's a reminder that red means hot.
I was looking for green.
Red is a hot item. All right. So thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 2, consideration of request for determination of funding with reasonable mitigating circumstances. So again, at this time, if people are wishing to make comment on item number 2, you should call in now. Please call 717-908-1926 and use access code 1166083#. Please note that the access code must be entered in order to be joined to the caller queue. And for those intending to make public comment in person, please use the sign-up sheet in the back of the room. So again, at this time, CDE, if you would like to go ahead and present.
Great. All right. So item 2 consists of a request for determination of funding with reasonable basis mitigating circumstances from Sierra Foothill Charter. So as previously stated, Senate Bill 820, Section 75 modified the funding determination process for fiscal year 21-22 and exempted schools with a funding determination that expires on June 30th, 2022 from the requirement to obtain an approved funding determination from the state board. However, as Sierra Foothill Charter does not have an active funding determination that expires on this date, it is required to obtain an approved funding determination from the state board. The department thus presents this item to the ACCS today. Sierra Foothill Charter does not meet the expenditure requirements for a recommendation of 100% funding for its non-classroom-based instruction. Sierra Foothill Charter reported spending 37.2% on certificated salaries and benefits and 74.9% on instruction and related services. It thus qualifies for a 70% determination of funding. So regulations permit the ACCS to find a reasonable basis or mitigating circumstance by which to make a recommendation other than one that results from the specified expenditure criteria. Specifically, the ACCS may consider other information provided by the charter school on its funding determination form or documented data regarding individual circumstances of the charter school, such as one-time unique or exceptional expenses or restricted grants of funds. Because it did not meet the expenditure requirements for a recommendation of 100% funding, Sierra Foothill Charter submitted mitigating circumstances for consideration. Specifically, the school cited its receipt of approximately $135,000 in ESSER 3 funding as the reason it did not meet the criteria for 100% funding. Without this one-time revenue, the school would have met the requirements for full funding. Although the CDE acknowledges that this funding was one-time in nature, the CDE also finds that the school reported a total reserve of approximately $940,000, which makes up over 61% of the school's total expenditures. Additionally, the CDE notes that the school reported an average daily attendance of 122.26 for fiscal year 21-22. The CDE finds these reserves to be very high for a school of this size, and when asked by the department, the school did not state any specific plans to spend down their reserves. So for these reasons, the department proposes to recommend that the state board deny Sierra Foothill Charter's mitigating circumstances request and approve their determination of funding request at 70% for 2 years. The CDE notes that the school may submit a reconsideration request to seek a higher level of funding pursuant to California Code of Regulations Title V, Section 11963.6G, during the effective period of its funding determination. Thank you again for your consideration of this item, and I'm happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
So once again, commissioners, just a reminder that this is a time for clarifying questions. And I will go first. I want to get one clarifying question out of the way, and then I'll recognize any other commissioners. So this basically comes down to their large reserves that they don't have accounted for.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other, Commissioner King?
So I just asked this particular clarifying question. So are you saying that the CDE does consider the one-time ESSER 3 fundings, both unique and exceptional?
Yes, we would. However, again, because of the large reserves, we are recommending a denial of their mitigating circumstances.
Commissioner Taylor.
On section 3, I was reading through the background materials, and it talks about their pupil to teacher ratio of 24.2. How did CDE consider that in relation to the total calculation?
Are you referring to their recommendation for 70% funding?
Yeah.
So for 70% funding, pupil teacher ratio isn't considered. That's a consideration for full funding.
Okay. But to be eligible for full funding, you have to have 25 to 1?
Yes, a pupil teacher ratio that does not exceed 25 to 1.
Okay.
Commissioner Austin.
Yes, I'm confused on the denial based on the higher reserves. Is it because they didn't
I was just, right now we should be asking questions and clarifying just the information she's given, deeper ones, because now we're starting to go to the deeper ones. Those I would like to hold.
I'll wait.
Okay. Commissioner Sever, do you have a clarifying question?
No, I was trying to find what percentage of their annual allocation goes to staffing. But I'm not sure if it's in here or not. Do you have that? Do you have any insights into that?
So we'll hold on to that one as well as one to come back to after we get public comment. So
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Sever. Any other clarifying regarding what has been presented? All right, seeing none. At this time, we'll go ahead and entertain public comment for this item. And then after we receive public comment, that's when we can go in and ask a few more of these questions and get some of the deeper answers, which I do appreciate. So is there any public comment for item 2 here? I'm seeing someone who looks like they are approaching.
Yes, one person, Eric Premack.
Well, we'll get your microphone turned on, Mr. Freeman.
Check 2, there we go.
Yes.
I used to be a sound reinforcement engineer. That's how I paid my way through college. Chair Walsh, members, Eric Premack with the Charter School Center. I'm here on behalf of our organization. This school is not one of our members, and I don't really know a whole lot about it one way or the other. But notwithstanding that, and notwithstanding our respect for Ms. Huey's work and all of the staff in the Charter Division, we're very concerned about this recommendation. We really think it sends the wrong message, and that it's an important issue for your consideration. The intent of the funding determination process is to prevent profiteering and or excessive or bloated administrative expenses. And when SB 740 was enacted, it was a very controversial piece of legislation, and Governor Davis took the unusual step of issuing a so-called signing message, a letter essentially reflecting what was the consensus at the time about how to interpret the law. And I'll quote directly from that message. He said, "I am requesting that the State Board of Education regulate and administer the provisions of this act in a manner to affect only those charter schools which spend excessively on administration and profit." Here the cuts are massive, would wipe out their reserves. Yes, they're big reserves, but I think they should be commended for building them up, not punished. And we think that this could send a very problematic message to the field if you were to approve this as is, and therefore we recommend 100% determination. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, we will take comment for those who are calling in. So for people calling in to make public comment, please note that upon calling in, you'll be added to the caller queue, and the operator will notify you when it is your turn to provide that comment. And again, you're limited to 1 minute. So do we have anyone calling in?
There are currently no callers in the queue.
All right. Thank you very much. So at this time, we're going to dive back into some of those deeper questions. And I'm going to begin with Commissioner Sever. I believe you had the last question.
If you didn't take into account any reserves at all, would they have met the criteria?
They would not have met they would have not met the criteria for a recommendation 100% full funding. They would have only met the criteria for a 70%.
And what factor is, and why?
Well, as outlined in regulations, charter schools are required to spend at least 40% of their public revenues on instructional certificates, salaries, and benefits, and at least 80% of their total revenues on instruction-related services, and the school did not meet those spending criteria.
Okay, so I'm looking at this correctly. They have $1,047,000 approximately in instruction-related services. They bring in 1.5, so that's what 66% they're using for instructional-related services when that should be at 80% to meet the 100% funding determination, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And isn't it, in the report, it says if they didn't receive the ESSER 3 funding, they would have met it. So maybe that's what Dr. Sever was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I misunderstand your question?
I don't know. There was something in the report about that they would have met it should it been X. And so my understanding when I read the report was they would have made that for 100% funding determination if it wasn't for the ESSER 3 funding that came in.
That is correct.
Commissioner King.
I'd like to offer kind of very similar to what was mentioned. The reason why I asked the question before if the CDE considered the ESSER 3 funding both unique and exceptional was for this reason. Because if you back it out, they meet the 40 and 80% threshold. Additionally, if you think about it, ESSER 3 funding was directly related to the pandemic and the pandemic only, and we received it in June. That's the month that we actually get out of school. So it would be inappropriate to penalize them for receiving monies at the last part of the school year that are both unique and exceptional. Additionally, because they're being conservative and trying their absolute best to make sure that they can weather any storm, I would also assume that that would be inappropriate. And finally, I would suggest that they even attempted to spend the funds, but their landlord restricted that particular improvement, which would have accounted for facilities. So again, in this case, what I would actually recommend is that they receive 100% funding and that they would receive that 100% funding for 3 years. And there's another reason for it. It's because ESSER 3 was unique in the sense that we can account it for it as deferred revenue. So the reality is this organization actually didn't have to account for it until the 2023-24 school year, or they would have lost it. So by giving them 3 years at 100%, their determination year would fall right before that. And so that I would think would be most appropriate.
Commissioner Austin?
I want to agree with Dr. King on everything he said. I think that regulatory-wise, though, we could only do 2 years or 5 years. So I would modify that recommendation to 2 years. But I agree with every other point. I know lots of districts that are struggling with how to spend their ESSER 3 money. And, the fact that this charter school got it in June, weren't able to do the capital improvement, I find it unreasonable to punish them for that. Additionally, I think it's not wise to start analyzing charter schools' reserves as we get out of the pandemic, because that's not a part of the funding determination criteria that I'm aware of or what we've looked at. And as a charter school operator that has a decent reserve, it is absolutely necessary for one of two reasons. One, the deferrals that we all had to weather. Two, we're looking at capital improvement and facilities, and if they can't even get their landlord to approve a capital project to spend ESSER 3 money, maybe they're saving that money to get their own property that then they will be able to make their own decisions on how to spend any other funding that might be state or federally given to them. So those are the concerns I have.
Commissioner Farland?
So just to clarify, we have looked at reserves in the past for these mitigating circumstances. And when asked about, I mean, you had some good thoughts there, Jared, about what they possibly could be saving their money for. But when asked, they didn't give us any answers. So we only have what we go on based on what the school itself has told us. And we've reached out to them, obviously, to ask these questions. So we didn't receive any answers about their facility, about what their plans were for the money. They were very clear, or at least they mentioned that they didn't have any solid plans for their reserves. So when we look at those, high reserves, and we know that they should be spending money on their kids, that's sort of what we go by, because we didn't have any other answers from the school at the time.
Can I ask another clarifying question?
Please.
So my understanding is that we can give them a determination between 2 and 5 years, correct? So we could do the 3.
Yes, that is correct, but just based on our practice, we're recommending a period of 2 years.
So the recommendation is 2 years. We have the option, to, as you said.
So I would recommend that we give them 100% funding at 3 years. The reason being is because of the expiration of the ESSER 3 funds. That 23-24 school year would put them to where they would have that determination year right beforehand. So then that way we would just be considering that it's unique and exceptional as admitted by the CDE. It would also give them the timeline to be able to spend it and account for it properly. And then that way they'd hit both the 40 and 80% thresholds.
Am I hearing a motion?
Yes. My motion is, just for clarification, that we fund them at.
Can I just real quick, before you make that motion, can I just make one comment? This is Wes Sever.
Certainly.
Just before you make the motion, I feel that I think the 2 years, and I agree. I think if you take out the ESSER monies, they're meeting the determination for 100% funding. I think we should give it to them. I think that them not knowing what they're going to spend those reserves on is a concern for me. I don't want them to come back in 3 years. I want them to come back in 2 years. And in 2 years, if they have extra ESSER money that they haven't spent, at least they'll know what they're going to spend it on. And then they'll also have a plan for their reserves in 2 years and not 3. And so that's why I'd just like to be consistent with what we're doing, as well as I'd like to see them back and either they've spent the money or they actually have a plan for those funds in 2 years.
So Commissioner Taylor, and then Commissioner King, I'll come back to you.
A question about the basis for the asking for a plan for reserves, Commissioner Sever. Is that something that the Commission's done in the past? Is ask these schools to provide us a plan for how they're going to spend down their reserves? I'm being new. I'm not sure that that's something.
No, well, we haven't, but you can ask CDE on that. But usually when they ask a district what they're spending their money on, they can give us some information. Apparently, this school, Foothill, didn't give us any information on what they plan to use a 60% reserve on. And so that would be concerning for me too, because especially with the learning loss and everything going on, are they paraprofessionals, intervention teachers? There's got to be something they're going to add to enhance and help those students with everything that's gone on in the last 2 years.
So at this time, I'm going to just share with the rest of the commissioners that the charter school is available if we have specific questions of them, that if you would like to ask. It's my understanding that they're available. Is that correct? That they are available. And right now it sounds like there are a few questions you have of them.
So my question is really, is it appropriate for us to be asking questions about them spending their reserves? This is a small organization. $940,000 in reserve will get you through a couple of months of payroll, maybe. So making sure that they have sufficient reserves in light of the recession that we're likely to enter, into deferrals that are potentially going to be coming. It feels fiscally prudent for me that they would have a reserve to protect themselves so they don't have to go out and get loans when it comes time to deferral. This is not a $100 million organization. $940,000 is a big percentage, but in real dollar terms, it's pretty small. So I would caution us about asking what their plans are for these reserves if that's not our mandate from the regulations.
Can I answer that?
Please.
So you're right, Matt, in terms of we probably would not be coming back and asking them about their reserves just out of the blue with not a funding determination in front of us. The next time they come back to us with the funding determination request, we certainly would look at that again, as we do with all schools who are asking for mitigating circumstances. We don't necessarily do that with all the schools that come before us, but mitigating circumstances is a one-on-one, one-by-one case basis, and we look at everything when they come before us. But in between terms of funding determinations, unless something pops up to us as super concerning, we would not be going back and asking those questions.
That makes sense. And the only reason they're coming to mitigating circumstances is because of these ESSER dollars. Had they not received the ESSER dollars, they would have met their criteria outright. Okay.
And I would offer one other thing. And to be honest with you, I won't die on the hill in terms of, I think 3 years is optimal, but I think if they left here and they got 2 years at 100%, they'd be saying hallelujah. So if that's the case, I have no problem amending the motion that I was about to put forward. And that motion would be 100% funding for 2 years.
And I'll second that motion. This is Wes.
And so we have a motion by Commissioner King for 100% funding at 2 years and a second by Commissioner Sever. So Commissioner Garbalina Mojica.
Yes, I was just going to say before you amended your motion that I was intrigued by the idea that you're aligning it to the cycle of the ESSER fundings, and that I was intrigued by that. I was ever since I read this agenda item, I've been in favor of 100% funding because I think that they've done they came close enough, and this is, I think the years that we've been living through is exceptional enough. And so, and I'm also concerned about, we hold schools accountable when they don't have sufficient reserves, and now on the other end, we're holding them accountable if they have too much reserves. And I kind of think that sends sometimes the wrong money if, in fact, they are using the money. I mean, it's not as if these staffing numbers are in the 20s, in the 20s. I mean, they were really, really close. And so I was waffling between 2 and 3 years. So thank you for making that decision for me.
If I can offer one other thing. So ESSER 3 funds were also exceptional in the sense you can treat it as deferred revenue. They could have treated it that way. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
And my only concern was that they hadn't appointed this money, assigned it in a category like you were just stating. That just seemed like a mistake, but I'm very comfortable with the recommendations that I'm hearing from this body regarding 2 years full funding. So are there any further deliberations, conversations, questions, comments? Then let's go ahead and take a vote. We have a motion from Commissioner King on 100% funding for 2 years, seconded by Commissioner Sever. So let's take a roll call vote. Commissioner Austin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Farland?
No.
Commissioner King?
Aye.
Commissioner Garbalina Mojica?
Yes.
Commissioner Sever?
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor?
Aye.
And I vote aye. So the motion passes to recommend 100% funding at 2 years. So thank you very much. That is the last item on our agenda. Our next meeting is scheduled. Let me get my calendar back up here for June. And if I can get the calendar to open quickly, I can be specific. It is scheduled for June 14th. So thank you very much, commissioners. And thank you very much, Commissioner Sever, for joining us from virtual land. We are adjourned.